Hello, I'm Dazzling One. It's hard to believe that today is the last day of the year. Time really flew by. Once again, thanks guys for a great year. I want to end the year by taking a look at different movies over the past 4 years. I'm going to do this by category rather than year. I predict this video will probably run over an hour long, so it may be split into 2 or 3 parts. We'll see how it goes. I want to first start off by saying, for those of you who are considered awake, as some put it, in the words of Alan Watts, he explains predictive programming as Hollywood is the magician's wand, holy holly, which has been used to cast a spell on the unsuspecting public. Things or ideals which would otherwise be seen as bizarre, vulgar, undesirable, or impossible are inserted into films in the realm of fantasy. When the viewer watches these films, his or her mind is left open to suggestion, and the conditioning process begins. These same movies, which are designed to program the average person, can give a discerning viewer a better understanding of the workings and the plan of the world agenda. Be aware. Predictive programming. The power of suggestion using the media of fiction to create a desired outcome. So automatically when we watch a movie, our brain switches from alpha brain waves to beta waves, which basically is more of our logical brain into a more dream-like state. And I talked about this in the 9 code video months back. If one is not aware of what they are seeing, it is easy to be subliminally programmed. You enter for detainment and you change the channel to get your programming. In my opinion, most people today with such a degenerate culture are easier to reach through entertainment. If you want to preach a message, no matter how good or bad, no matter how nonsensical or how complex, you put it in the form of entertainment and you add some really good special effects, bad jokes, and people will receive it better oftentimes than if you were to just tell them the straight truth with facts. Truth oftentimes is hidden in plain sight. The best lies are the ones that are closest to the truth. If you want to convince someone of something, entertain them. Hollywood sometimes does seem to run out of ideals. That's why they're doing a lot of reboots and remakes. But this is also why they're turning a lot of books into movies. And remember, a lot of these stories have been told. They're basically rehashing sometimes mythological stories as well. Even the plot, when you take a look at it, or even on a movie, the set, the characters in the story, the way they're put together, the people they cast for them, their appearance, the music they play, the lighting, everything in a movie has a purpose. Nothing is there by chance. Keep that in mind. Superheroes and Marvel and DC movies is going to be my first category. So I'm pretty sure you guys noticed by now, Marvel and DC have a monopoly pretty much on all superhero movies. I mean, who doesn't like a good hero movie? However, oftentimes, if you take a closer look, they're using these heroes to depict real figures that once and still do exist, and are also pushing a political agenda and their viewpoints. So let's start with Iron Man. The Iron Man series is based on the Marvel comic written by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, Jack Kirby, and Don Heck. The plot is centered around a man by the name of Anthony Stark, otherwise known as Tony Stark. Stark is a billionaire, a philanthropist, and a playboy who inherited defense contractor Stark Industries while attending a field test with a friend in Afghanistan to demonstrate the Jericho missile, which right there should be a giveaway, just by taking a look at the name of the missile, which shares the name of the ancient Jericho described in the Bible that the children of Israel marched around 7 times before it fell down. The convoy Stark is in is ambushed and he is injured by a rocket propeller grenades. He then is captured by a terrorist organization by the name of the Ten Rings and is taken to a cave. A fellow captive by the name of Yasin grafts an electromagnet into his chest, and since the sharp nail nearly reached his heart, killing him, the electromagnet basically saves his life. A leader by the name of Raza offers Stark freedom if he helps him build a Jericho missile for the group. Yasin and Stark both are aware Raza won't stay true to his word and begin building a suit of armor to be powered by a reactor. They nearly make it to the stage of completion, but once they are discovered, the Ten Rings destroy the workshop. Yasin sacrifices himself, and you see this theme again and again. Everyone is willing to sacrifice themselves for the main character in every single story, no matter if the main character was a jerk, if they're undeserving, or whether they're humble and they deserve to be sacrificed for, they will sacrifice themselves for them. Stark, suited in the gear, fights the Ten Rings and escapes home. Like just about every movie based on a comic series, we see the theme of transhumanism, hence the name Iron Man. His heart is being run on a battery. Also, outside of the movie, there was a short comic series put out about a group called the Illuminati. Iron Man was one of the heroes which was part of it, along with Doctor Strange, who was a sorcerer, Black Bolt, King of the Inhumane, Charles Xavier, founder of X-Men, Reed Richards, founder of Fantastic Four, and Namor, the Submariner, King of Atlantis, which bears similarity to the Greek god Poseidon. His name also sounds to me similar to the succubus demon by the name of Nema, who I believe is the Queen of the Coast, which is a marine spirit. And if you don't know about that, I have a video on that, and you can look it up. Or the Dagon god, which is a Babylonian fish god, and the idol of the people of Nineveh that they worshipped. It also seems that the Vatican borrowed the style of Dagon. The third movie of Iron Man, there are terrorists whom are phonies, sort of like terrorist organizations today, whether it's the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. Many times they're backed by and funded by our own government, and the men that they put out there who give the threats, like the death threats, like all those videos with the beheadings, where they were standing in the still, and their clothes were blowing by a fan, and the knife looked really tiny, and there wasn't really any blood leaking, and they blacked out everything. That kind of fakeness, yeah. Basically, in the movie, Iron Man finds out that the guy that's given all the threats, he's not even a real terrorist, which to me is pretty much the way a lot of the times things are. However, the media would tell you otherwise, and because it's a movie, don't believe it. Of course, like I said, the best lies are closest to the truth, and truth oftentimes is hidden in plain sight, hence the movie. So Thor is considered the god of thunder in Norse mythology, but in Marvel movies, he is a superhero who comes to Earth. The story reminds me a lot of fallen angels, the Watchers to be exact, described in Genesis 6 and the Book of Enoch. It is interesting to note that Thor is punished by his father Odin by being banished from Asgard. Sounds a lot like Ashtar, which is considered the leader of the Alien Council by a lot of New Agers, and is also a similar name to the goddess Ashtaroth or Astarte. He is sent to Earth stripped of his powers. Since he is the god of thunder, he comes during a thunderstorm. Remind you of anyone? I talked about this last week. The scripture, Luke 10:18, and he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. He's the god of thunder, just like Zeus, which Jesus also warned against the seed of Satan in Revelations 2:13. I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. And thou holdest fast my name, and hast not denied my faith, even in those days wherein Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you, where Satan dwelleth. Some believe he is referring to the throne of Zeus. Thor is also tall with blonde hair and blue eyes, the typical Aryan look. Oftentimes the gods were depicted across mythology, no matter if you're talking about Native Americans or wherever, or Europe, as being giants with fair skin, pale hair, and blue eyes. Also during World War II, Hitler, who I believe was a demon-possessed man, was obsessed with the Aryan race, which originates from India, but his ideal of an Aryan was the blonde-haired, blue-eyed look, which was similar to what the Nephilim were depicted as oftentimes in mythology. Hitler is also believed to have been in contact with Pleiadians, ETs, which I believe simply boils down to demons. Then Thor also falls in love with a woman by the name of Dr. Jane Frost. Just like the Watchers, whom came to Earth and took a wife, he is unable to be with her because he must return to Asgard to reign and protect it. But he promises he will return, and he does return in the next movie because she's in trouble. And it seems there's another planet that's affecting Earth, which will cause a lot of problems, and it sounds a lot like Planet X or Nibiru. The next movie is The Man of Steel. The Man of Steel has some of the most blatant symbolism I've ever seen. Superman is from the planet Krypton, and his father is Jor-El. There goes the El name. It was a name used for God in the Bible, but the Canaanites also had a pagan El as well. And then the Superman's real name is Kal-El, also sort of reminds me of the goddess Kali. which is from Hindu mythology, the goddess of destruction. His father sends him to Earth with the entire Kryptonian race encoded in his DNA. Sounds sort of Christ-like if you ask me. Krypton explodes. Could this possibly mirror any possible planets that fallen angels once populated before the creation of mankind? He lands in a small town in Kansas called Smallville. In the film, Clark Kent is 33 years old, same age Jesus Christ was estimated to be when he was persecuted. The symbol from the movie looks a lot like a serpent. The villain in the movie is General Zod, and he committed a coup on planet Krypton before it was destroyed at the beginning of the movie. However, he comes to Earth in an attempt to terraform it so it will be livable for his fellow Kryptonian species with the Codex. Sounds very much like the same old story of the Anunnaki who came to Earth in search of gold and created man to be a slave race. In my opinion, I believe the reason that fallen angels were so fond of gold, since I believe fallen angels were the Anunnaki, is because it reminds them of something they had in heaven, which was streets made of gold. In Revelation 21:21, and the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gate was with one pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, as it were transparent glass. It also sets us up for the false dilemma scenario, which is an either-or fallacy. I say this because here we have Superman, whom in the movie bears striking similarities to Jesus Christ. However, I believe he's not representing Jesus, but the Antichrist. And there's even a scene in the movie where he flies back down to Earth with his arms outstretched as if he's in a cross. Then you have General Zod and his goons, and they are the bad guys. The reason I say this is if you look at the future and say we had some sort of extraterrestrial visitors, who's not to say that they would play good versus evil, when in turn they really are on the same side? Just food for thought. The Dark Knight Rises. The Dark Knight Rises got a lot of attention when released back in 2012 after the midnight showing of it in the Aurora Theater. The shooting occurred. The name of the gunman was James Holmes, and he had dyed his hair red and claimed he was impersonating the Joker. Although he was simply written off as someone with mental illness, truth to be told, he was most likely a Manchurian candidate. Was the movie a thriller, or of sorts? Just before even discussing the plot, the title, The Dark Knight Rises, could be symbolic of the Dark Knight. The Dark Knight being the Antichrist, but also the theater chosen for the shooting was in Aurora, Colorado. Aurora is also the name of a goddess, which was the Roman goddess of dawn. Was the shooting a sacrifice to this entity? Aurora was also known as Eos, meaning light bringer. Sound familiar? Lucifer, which last week I discussed, was not the real name of Satan, but simply a title. However, Lucifer is associated with being the light bringer, associated with Venus as well, and his devout followers refer to him as it. Since oftentimes you have occultists making these films, I find it to be no coincidence that they were killed in that very city with that very name at 12:45 a.m., hours before dawn. Going into the movie, Batman has gone off the radar, becoming a recluse. You have Catwoman, a gold digger, and a criminal. The League of Shadows, just by the name, one can easily see these figures may remain in the dark and unseen, yet play a major role in affecting the lives of those around them, much like our shadow government, under the lead of Ra's al Ghul and Bane. A lot is going on in the movie, but something I think that is easy to pick up on is you see an uprising of the lower class against the rich, something that is often depicted in the movie, like The Purge. We see the socio-economic war that constantly goes on between the haves and the have-nots. In the movie, Catwoman says, "There's a storm coming, Mr. Wayne. You and your friends better batten down the hatches, because when it hits, you're all going to wonder how you ever thought you could live so large and leave so little for the rest of us." And he responds by saying, "You sound like you're looking forward to it." And she replies, "I'm adaptable." It's more so, in my opinion, the elites plan to sacrifice the economy in the Western world in order to bring about the New World Order. The same old doctrine, order out of chaos. You see this again when Wall Street is attacked, which, if you attack Wall Street, you're definitely going to bring down the stock market. And the number 121 appears often in the film, which has the number 11 in it, which is a number associated with being a sacrificial number. There is also the theme of martial law. And there's a scene where Sandy Hook is pointed to on a map. Just a lot of other shady things that are shown in this movie that depict that they had planned Sandy Hook and the shooting. There is also a flashing of 322 at the football game. What is 322, some may ask? Well, it's associated with the fraternity Skull and Bones at Yale University that many of our former presidents have been a part of. And then we have the movie The Amazing Spider-Man. I was kind of disappointed when I found out that it was going to be rebooted because I really like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. But getting back to the topic, in The Amazing Spider-Man, the new Peter Parker is more comical than Tobey Maguire's character. I mean, he still gets bullied by Flash Thompson. His love interest is Gwen Stacy, opposed to Mary Jane in the other series. In the first movie, he is fighting a lizard villain, otherwise known as Dr. Connors, who works at Oscorp, and is handed the task by his superior, Dr. Rotha, to cure the dying head of Oscorp, Norman Osborn. After Connors sees he is able to grow the limb back of the mouse by using lizard DNA, Dr. Rotha takes notice and demands he develop some to be used on humans. Dr. Connors refuses to use them on humans, finding it unethical. And Rotha, upset, fires him and decides he will use the serum developed by testing it at a VA hospital. Just stopping here, you can very well see it is no secret the bitter relationship and scandals between the VA hospital and veterans, and how they experiment on innocent human people. And I had a video on human experimentation. It's very sad. In some cases, they were putting uranium in people at the hospital and they didn't even know it. Connors quickly uses some of it on himself and awakens to find his limbs grown back, but soon morphs into a lizard and goes to stop Rotha. By the time he reaches him, he's completely changed. He kills him, and that is the birth of the Lizard Man. We see Marvel went with a typical reptilian, draconian theme. Also note, Satan is referred to as a serpent and a dragon, oftentimes which is a reptile. In Revelations 22, and he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. By the end of the movie, Connors has decided to try to release a toxin in the air that will turn everyone in the city into a lizard hybrid like himself, but in his mind, to relieve humans of their weaknesses. I mean, gross, who wants to be human when you could be a lizard, right? Sounds like a fallen angel's wet dream, if you ask me. And as always, Spider-Man, whom had to be mutated by being bitten by a spider at the beginning of the movie, saves the day. In the sequel, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the villain is Max, whom idolizes Spider-Man after being saved. Like every villain on Spider-Man, Max has an accident and falls into a container filled with genetically modified electric eels, and is constantly stung and is mutated into an electric generator. After wandering out of the lab, confused, and onto the street of Times Square causing a blackout, Spider-Man angers him when he tries to calm him down, and they become enemies. Simultaneously in the movie, Harry Osborn returns home from college to take over his deceased father's business and learns he too has the same illness his father has. Harry becomes fixated on Spider-Man, believing his blood will save him, and asks Peter to give him his blood. To give him Spider-Man's blood, since Peter is known to take pictures of Spider-Man. Of course, that doesn't work out when Peter refuses, realizing it could harm Harry, and he goes mad and steals some of the blood for himself anyways, and in turn mutates into the Green Goblin. Spider-Man has his hands full in the movie, and mostly I would say the prevalent theme of it was transhumanism more than anything else. In the movie, Peter learns that his father refused to agree to Norman Osborn's bioweaponization plan, which we saw in the first as well. The obsession with bioweaponization, the ideal of unleashing some sort of invisible agent on the general public, whether to mutate them or make them sick, and we know things like that do exist. The next movie, X-Men Days of Future Past. So in the beginning, it starts off with Sentinels, which are exterminating mutants with human allies. They are destroying the world. Sound familiar? Kitty Pryde sends Wolverine back 50 years in the past to find the past Magneto and Xavier and try to reverse the future in order to prevent Mystique from assassinating Bolivar Trask, because it resulted in her being captured and her DNA being used to create Sentinels, since they can take on any mutant's powers, which makes them pretty much invincible. in the movie, once again, just being familiar with the series, you're dealing with mutants or X-Men, and also with the Centennials, which are mutants whom destroy the future, which is more transhumanism. However, because Mystique saves the president in the end, as a mutant, the Centennial program is canceled, and mutants are seen as good, which is what they want us in the future to come to accept. In the sneak peek for the next movie, if you stuck around in the theater, we see a crowd and they chant "En Sabanur," who is using telekinesis to build pyramids, as 4 horsemen keep watch nearby. 4 horsemen. Makes me think of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Clearly, it is another, it bears semblance to the stories of the Nephilim, who some claim they were able to use harmonic frequencies, or whom were thought to have telekinesis to move objects, and that's how they suggest they move rocks and bricks to build the pyramids. Of course, they're so huge that they probably could have just moved it themselves. Then we have Captain America. Captain America, like most Marvel movies, are set around real historic events. In the case of Captain America, it opens during World War II. Captain America, also known as Steve Rogers, is rejected for soldier recruitment because of health and physical problems. However, while attending an exhibition of future technology with a friend, Bucky, or Sergeant James Bucky Barnes, Dr. Abraham Eskin overhears their conversation, helps Rogers enlist. He is recruited on the terms of being tested for a super soldier project. And of course, we all know about super soldiers and how DARPA is trying to develop them so they can see in the dark and so forth. And I believe that the kind of super soldiers that some people believe are yet to exist actually exist already. He is warned by Erskine that Smith had underwent the same experiment and had negative permanent effects. However, he still decides to go through with it, and as a result of the experiment, Rogers is taller and muscular. Erskine gets assassinated by Heinz Kruger, whom Rogers tries to catch, but commits suicide by way of a cyanide pill. Senator Brandt has him tour the country in a patriotic suit, or as Captain America, to promote war bonds, hence the name Captain America. The villain in the movie is a man by the name Smith, or Red Skull, same guy who suffered the side effects of the experiment. And he's affiliated with Hydra. Red Skull plans to use weapons of mass destruction on citizens. Captain America ends up saving the day, but is presumed dead by Stark, and later awakens 70 years later to find himself in modern Times Square. The follow-up to Captain America is Captain America Winter Soldier, and it takes place 2 years later, and he now works for S.H.I.E.L.D. In the movie, he learns that S.H.I.E.L.D. is compromised by Hydra after Fury is ambushed by someone by the name of Winter Soldier. Throughout the movie, there are a lot of references for a plan of New World Order, and it's pretty blatant, as well as the use of biometrics. It also is later learned that Rogers' friend Bucky was kidnapped and pretty much turned into a Manchurian candidate by Hydra. It is noted that Bucky's memorial is at the Smithsonian Institute, and the Smithsonian, let's keep in mind, they actually came and they excavated and took a lot of the bones of Nephilim and proof to hide any of the existence and covered it up. There's also reference of the Lumeria star, which pretty much is a shout-out to the mythical continent that was believed to have existed along with Atlantis, another continent that's believed to be sunken underwater but was inhabited by an advanced pre-Adamic civilization. Then there are the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The movie is centered around April O'Neil, a reporter for Channel 6 News. Channel 6, which, the symbolism of 6 is the number of man, but also 6 a lot of times. When you have 3 of them, it's used for the beast. And she's been researching the Foot Clan and happens upon some criminal activity and winds up a hostage along with a few others. While being held hostage, she witnesses 4 large figures whom save them. She follows them with a video camera and finds out that they are turtles. She later learns that they're the same turtles that she had for pets in her father's lab. And after a fire, the lab was burned down, she saved them and set them free in the sewer. In the movie, the antagonist is Eric Sachs, a famous scientist and the CEO of Sachs Industries, also April's dad's lab partner. She later learns he is planning on spreading a deadly virus throughout New York City. Once again, there is the ideal of chemical warfare, or a bioweapon. He hopes that... The next category is post-apocalyptic or end-of-the-world films. I want to talk about this theme because I feel it's been more popular in the 21st century. Not to say it wasn't popular in the 20th. I mean, you did have War of the Worlds, but it seems a lot more people are into it now. And a lot of people believe that we're living in the last days. And these movies tell us a lot about the elite's plans for the future of mankind. So, World War Z. It's based on a novel, World War Z, and a World History of Zombie War by Max Brooks. In the movie, an outbreak has caused infected people to become zombies, and then whomever they attack ends up becoming one as well. Typical zombie plot. Jerry Lane, played by Brad Pitt. The reason I'm mentioning him is this is around the time he started wearing his hair longer, and pretty much he resembled the same guy who played Jesus in the Son of God movie that came out last spring. Brad Pitt's character, Jerry, saves the world in World War Z by injecting himself, and then later curing himself using his own blood as a cure, which to me seems like a Christ-like move. What is interesting is during the Ebola outbreak scare, there was a drug called Z-Map they were using, which was from the first infected person to be cured. Sounds like they borrowed the narrative from World War Z. Also, it is interesting to note Israel is one of the places unaffected, thanks to their strong military in Mossad, which there are tons of conspiracy theories you could get into with that. In the movie, Jerry's daughter innocently asks, "Daddy, what's martial law?" So here we see the reference to a long-standing plan that the elite want to implement under the right circumstances, but as always, in order to bring about such a thing, they need chaos. Also at the beginning, I couldn't help but notice numerous television shows flashing. Rag shows, talk shows, news, whatever the case. In my opinion, they were hinting at how media is simply distracting everyday people while, as they showed in the wild, the disease was spreading. I'm guessing the masses were too caught up in their day-to-day affairs to see something ominous was looming. And World War Z, it's not the only zombie movie, but so many people are obsessed with zombies. Some people even want a zombie apocalypse. It's just crazy. The next series I'm going to talk about is Hunger Games. It's based on the popular children's book series by Susan Collins. It's centered around a 16-year-old girl by the name of Katniss Everdeen. There are 12 districts. There used to be 13, but 13 was destroyed when they tried to start a revolution against the Capitol, and the Capitol won. Every year, male and female participants are chosen from a district between the ages of 12 and 18 for an annual reaping. Sort of reminds me of the lottery. They must fight one another until one survives. They are allowed to volunteer as a tribute in place of another. Since Katniss' sister, Primrose, is chosen, she decides to take the place of her 12-year-old sister. Her, along with a boy by the name of Peeta Malark, go through the games and defy the Capitol. A lot of people saw this as an anti-Illuminati movie. In all honesty, I could see something like this happening for real. One thing, the killing of children a year or reaping is a form of population control. These children, one male and one female, if dead, can no longer reproduce and carry on a new generation, so it keeps the elite happy. It also shows their barbaric nature if they enjoy watching children kill each other. Pete and Katniss defy the Capitol by threatening suicide by both deciding to eat the poison berries. It reminds me of Romeo and Juliet, and also, once again, the forbidden fruit I can't help but think of eating. In the second movie, they are forced to compete again because of quarter quell, which occurs every 25 years, and Katniss is made a figurehead by the Capitol. What's interesting is this sort of thing happens all the time. She's made a celebrity, which is what a celebrity's job is to do, to distract the masses. So they're content with their day-to-day lives. They never question anything. She also is considered the face of a revolution. And by making her the figurehead, they try to make her a form of controlled opposition, which we see all the time. There's also a scene in the second movie, Catching Fire, and her symbol, the Mockingjay. I've seen some say that it looks similar to some symbol that the Nazis used. When she's faking that her and Peter are getting married on the television show, she spins around in her wedding dress and she spans wings with her arms stretched out. I couldn't help but think of the famous Egyptian goddess Isis. In the most recent film, Mockingjay Part 1, the Capitol is using her love for Peeta as a weapon. Peeta also seems to be under severe mind control, which reminds me a lot of them using MK Ultra on him. When they finally reunite at the end, he attacks her like a Manchurian candidate. There also is the revolution going on, and once again, Katniss is the face of it. Fire is the big theme of the movie. After all, the second book was called Catching Fire. In my opinion, the setting could very well be the United States in the future. I've said in the past, I believe America is Babylon, and as a result, it will burn down. They had a chant that went something like, "You can burn down our buildings and us, but you'll burn down with us." There was a lot of riots and rebels, basically an uprising or anarchy, which is what once again the elite need to bring about a new world order. Also, District 13 wasn't destroyed, which is interesting that the revolution is being spawned by Katniss broadcasting from that very district, considering there are 13 bloodlines, and the number 13 is sacred to the Illuminati. Also, the president of District 13 at the end states that they are one nation, one people, one tongue. Sounds like New World Order to me. And one of the characters in the movie actually begins leaking some of the dirty secrets of the president, and he talks about how he would have him sell his body. And this was interesting to me. I mean, I didn't read the books. I probably should have. But in a children's book, for a character to say that in a movie based off a children's book, but it is reality that, I think, at Boys Town and the scandals that went on there, that there are people who are sex slaves and children who are forced to sell their body to politicians and people in power. So it's interesting he said that. And also he revealed how he poisoned many of his enemies as well as allies to keep his power, and basically would off them. And we see this all the time. Certain world leaders die, just mysteriously die, or even sometimes celebrities mysteriously die. And once again, they're being very upfront with us about what's really going on. And of course, what better time when we're seeing just more uprisings in modern times. The next movie I want to discuss is Stakeland. It is another post-apocalyptic film with vampires roaming around everywhere, because we all know that when the world comes to an end, we're going to have to either deal with zombies or bloodthirsty vampires. Sounds to me like they were planning on a Nephilim return, since in Enoch 7, 1-5, and all the others together with them took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go unto them and to defile themselves with them, and they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose heights was 300 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them, and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid acquisition against the lawless ones, which matches Genesis 6:4 in the Bible, and also in Ezekiel 5:10. Therefore the father shall eat the sons in the midst of thee, and the sons shall eat their fathers. And I will exclude judgments in thee, and the whole remnant of thee will I scatter into the winds. That to me hints, once again, because we saw cannibalism, and history repeats itself, there's nothing new under the sun, that we will see a return of prevalent cannibalism. Like everything, I did a video about cannibalism in the past as well. If you haven't already seen it, I suggest you do. So moving on to the actual plot of Stakeland. So a vampire epidemic plagues mankind, and people are fearful of the night because that is when the vampires emerge, and most people live together in small rural pockets since the cities have been majorly abandoned. Martin, the main character's family, is killed by vampires at the beginning one night and is later taken under the wing of a hunter called Mr. He begins to train him in fighting vampires, and they journey towards farmland in Canada that is referred to as New Eden. Throughout their journey, they meet strangers whom they save and accompany them. On their journey, they run into the main antagonist of the movie, Jebediah Lovin, the leader of a fundamentalist militia, who believes that he is completing the Lord's work and that the plague is part of the Lord's work. Already, from the little I relayed to you, you can see the typical Hollywood plot with fanatical Christians whom cheer whenever people die. However, he is also a white supremacist from the way he is displayed in the movie, and also his followers, I see it on his head, they have a trident. A trident doesn't seem all that Christian It seems more like the object that Satan is often depicted carrying. It originally comes from the Greek mythology affiliated with Neptune or Poseidon. With his trident, he is able to cause earthquakes, deluges, basically threefold: earth, heaven, and hell. Indian Trishula is three-toothed, three-pronged, and as a noun, a three-pronged spear or fork. It is associated with as above, so below. The same thing you see Baphomet doing when he holds up two fingers while two are facing down, and it is an inversion. Also, just kind of going back to Hunger Games, since I talked about that before, the Mockingjay symbol that they hold up with their fingers, if you take, if you move the thumb closer to the other two hands, to the other two fingers, then you're going to get a symbol similar to the as above, below sign. And it is, of course, an inversion of as it is on earth as it is in heaven. And you see the trident pop up in popular symbols. The U.S. Navy, whom go figure, maybe it's because by now everything in the U.S. is a result of them worshiping some kind of pagan deity. I mean, the Navy is supposed to protect us. They do sea battle, and yet Poseidon is the symbol his trident is used for. Or what about Maserati or the coat of arms in Ukraine? 3 is an important number to them. It also is the inversion of the Trinity. And once again, as I said in another video, the devil's kingdom operates on earth, land, and the sea. It represents Satan's control on earth of all 3 realms. By the end of the film, the main villain, Jebediah, is turned into a pyre and tries to kill them, still thinking he is doing the Lord's work. Like all crazy psycho Christians on movies. Also, he and a young girl arrive to New Eden, basically like Adam and Eve. So that's pretty much what I get out of Stakeland. And then there's Divergent. Divergent is based on a popular young adult book series by Veronica Roth. It is set in dystopian future in Chicago. After a war has occurred, society is divided into 5 factions: the Abnegations, which are the selfless; Amity, peaceful; Candor, the honest; Dauntless, the brave; and Erudite, the intelligent. The Abnegation runs the government. They take an aptitude test at the age of 16, and based on the results, they join a faction. 16-year-old Beatrice Pyre has grown up in abnegation her entire life, and her father Andrew serves on the ruling council. When administered the test by a dauntless woman named Tori, rather than showing 1 result, she shows 3: Dauntless, Erudite, Abnegation, meaning she is divergent. Since she doesn't fit into 1 category, which is extremely rare, Tori warns her to keep her results a secret, since divergents are a threat to the government, since they cannot be controlled, and records her as Abnegation. Here we see a typical plot. Beatrice, later called Triss, is someone whom the government cannot control. Therefore, she must be stopped and suppress her gift, much like Katniss or in stories like The Giver. At the ceremony, her brother switches from Abnegation to Erudite, and out of hesitation, she chooses Dauntless. Throughout the movie, she struggles in the beginning, adjusting, ranking lower at the lower end, but slowly improves as they are put into less physical tests, but tests that they face their fears in. She also meets a guy by the name of Thor. They begin a relationship, but he warns her that she should not let her divergence show because it could be dangerous. She also learns that the Erudites are planning to overthrow the Abnegation. In the movie, there is a serum that was developed by the Erudite as a form of mind control to use the Dauntless to kill the Abnegation. Once again, there's a theme of overthrowing the current government to bring in a new, in this case a more intelligent rather than a selfless. However, the serum does not work on Thor, whom she learns is Tobias, nor does it work on her. And he also was former Abnegation and prefers Thor because he was abused by his father. And Triss and him are able to take down the Erudites and start their life over, leaving the gates of that city where they were locked in. So once again, you see young people realizing there's something more to life when there's been this sheltered environment, and they escape it. The next movie take a look at is The Book of Eli. It takes place 30 years after a nuclear apocalypse. Eli, the main character, is traveling on foot heading for the West Coast. This reminded me somewhat of Stephen King, The Stand, because the characters were heading for Las Vegas. Although it is not the coast, they were still heading west. I just found that part interesting. He arrives in a town controlled by a man by the name of Carnegie, who dreams of controlling people using a book which turns out to be the Bible. And Eli has the last remaining copy of the Bible. Carnegie, like Eli, are both literate, which is rare. This is interesting to me because in the past the Bible was not accessible to all like it is now. And throughout history, those who were literate and who had access to it would use it, and they would take scriptures out of context to try to control people. Eli is guided by a voice in his head, which I'm assuming is supposed to be God, to take it to the West Coast. Like all post-apocalyptic movies, what would it be without if cannibals? Yes, cannibals are in it. Carney does seize possession of it in the end, but is made to learn it's in Brill, whereas Eli makes it to his location and is able to recite the entire Bible from memory, later making it possible for it to be printed. In the end, after Eli's death, it is placed in between the Torah, Jewish Old Testament Tanakh, Quranic books, and Quran, Islamic texts. I think the movie's plot is pretty self-explanatory. And then the next movie is The Planet of the Apes. So, the 2011 Rise of the Planet of the Apes, since I know there are two others that predate it, starts with a scientist who works at a biotechnology company. I'm pretty sure you can already guess what the outcome will be, sort of like the movie Slice. They are testing on chimpanzees to find cures for diseases like Alzheimer's. ALZ-112 is the drug that is administered to a chimpanzee named Bright Eyes. The chimp is disturbed and his boss demands Franklin terminates the experiment. When Franklin discovers that Bright Eyes was pregnant, he realizes the reason for her erratic behavior after being told to euthanize the chimp. He pleads with his boss and takes the baby chimp home. Will's father, whom suffers from Alzheimer's, names the chimp Caesar. And Will treats his father, who is deteriorating from the disease. It helps him somewhat. After Caesar defends Charles, Will's father, against a neighbor, he is confused, and after the incident, Will decides to take Caesar to a primate shelter. However, he is mistreated by those at the primate center. Will's father dies from the treatment, and Will returns to get Caesar, but he refuses to go home with him. He escapes to the lab and unleashes ALZ-113, a form of the drug, but in a gaseous agent on the chimps. In the end, he helps the apes escape and helps other apes escape from the San Francisco Zoo. There is a battle between the police and the apes, but they win and leave into the forest. In the second movie, much of civilization, because it takes place 10 years after, has died from the ALZ-113, which has spread and killed many humans. The apes have been living in a forest away from humans. However, they realize, the few survivors in San Francisco, that there may be a way to hook up a signal to connect them to the rest of the world. The problem is, after a negative encounter with the apes, there is enmity between them. In the movie, there was a revolution spawned by the apes, and Koba, one of the apes, turned into the antagonist. Caesar's son, Blue Eyes, ended up having to assume a bigger role after Caesar was nearly killed by Koba. In the end, after the damage, Koba has called Caesar, is aware that the humans will never forgive the apes for what has happened, and they prepare for war. I think the apes are symbolic of people and the government, as how they view citizens as animals, and them having to go up against the government. The next movie is Priest. It is another post-apocalyptic film, taking place with a century-long war between humans and vampires. Vampires have made it hard to live for humans, and the church runs everything. Humans live within giant walls protecting them. This reminds me of many plots of people living in walled cities away from the monsters, kind of like the anime series Attack on Titan. Only a group of elite warriors are allowed to venture beyond the walls, protecting the inhabitants from vampires. The majority of vampires were killed and placed on reservations. After the war, the clergy disbands, and the priests and some humans try to live beyond the walls. In the movie, Priest's niece, which we later learn is his actual daughter, since her mother and him had a relationship before he went into the priesthood, and she later married his brother. Her name is Lucy. Remember, Lucy is oftentimes another name for Lucifer, but it could just be a random name chosen. Lucy is kidnapped by vampires after her mother and adoptive father are killed. Priest asks for the clergy's help for rescuing his niece, but they don't believe his story. He leaves and goes to rescue her himself. There are people called familiars in the movie at a reservation, which are people infected with the pathogen that makes them subservient to vampires. It is interesting that they use the name familiars. In the occult, a familiar is thought to be a spirit that assists a witch or oftentimes an animal, sometimes humanoid in appearance, and are thought to have magical abilities. A stereotypical familiar oftentimes is a black cat, which brings about superstition for many. In Christianity, familiars were seen as demons, but for pagans, they were the equals to what some may call guardian angels. Familiars were often sought out throughout meditation or divination. The villain in the film Black Cat, who was a former priest, who priest was unable to save when in a cave in Solomira, who later was transformed and is now half human and half vampire by the Queen when she gives him her blood, kind of like the movie Will Smith is working on called The Redemption of Cain, where Lilith turns Cain into a vampire, or the Dracula movie that came out where he makes a deal with the devil and he gets those powers, or how about in one of the other Dracula movies where you find out that Judas, when he hung himself, he's turned into a vampire. Interesting, vampires are most likely fallen angels, and I've heard the Mothman connections as well. And this is where the lore comes from. And of course, the Queen very much could be Lilith or Lilu. It is interesting, his name is Black Hat because he wears kind of a top hat looking hat. His clothing looks pretty similar to the Hat Man figure people often describe of coming in contact with through paranormal experiences. There's a town called Jericho in the movie. Once again, here we go with the Jericho thing. The vampires take control of the train system, sort of like in the movie Stakeland, except it was the militia whom had control of the train blocking roads. But in Priest, these vampires sleep on the trains during the day and in the night hop out and attack towns. It almost reminds me of the movie 30 Days a Night, where the vampires attack a small town and burn it down so no one will ever know what truly happened there. They attack during the 30 polar nights. And like I said, once again, you see the whole thing with a post-apocalyptic society and monsters running it. And of course, when you read in the Bible, and it talks about how there's going to be desolate land, and in Babylon's going to become a desolate land, and finding a man will be like more valuable than finding, I think it said gold. So I think this is all just foreshadowing post-apocalyptic because of nuclear warfare, disease, whatever, what they're trying to do. But once again, the symbolism in Priest was interesting.